The quiet ones are dangerous. That's what Dr. Sterling had heard in the break room gossip, but he dismissed it as the nervous chatter of nurses intimidated by his credentials. He didn't see the woman checking into Sacred Heart's pediatric ICU on a Tuesday morning at 6:51 a.m., her dark hair pulled tight, her movements economical as a surgeon's. He didn't know that Ashley Cooper, the name on her employment badge, had carried 17 wounded Marines through Helmand Province firefight in temperatures that melted boot rubber. And he certainly didn't know that the pair of worn combat boots in her employee locker, caked with sand from a classified operation that had been erased from official records, belonged to someone who had learned to move through hostile territory without making a sound. Sacred Heart's pediatric ICU smells of antiseptic and something else, the particular desperation that hangs in rooms where children fight for futures they haven't lived yet. The fluorescent lights buzz overhead with the constant hum of fluorescent tubes that have been burning for 12 hours straight, casting everything in that colorless hospital light that makes healthy people look sick and sick people look like ghosts. Ashley moves through the unit at 6:52 a.m., before the morning chaos arrives. Her white dance goes squeaking softly against linoleum that smells faintly of bleach. She passes the medication dispensary, the equipment room with its organized shelves of supplies, the isolation rooms where the sickest children spend their days, and arrives at the assignment board where Dr. Sterling has already written her first patient in his precise, arrogant handwriting: Marcus Reeves, spinal injury, room for 12, paralysis evaluation pending. She finds him awake. 12 years old, thin shoulders against white pillows, eyes that have already learned the particular emptiness that comes from losing your body's permission to move. The wheelchair sits folded in the corner of his room, waiting. Marcus looks out the window at San Diego's morning, the palm trees beginning to catch light, the city waking up without him, and doesn't turn when she enters. Ashley reads his chart first. T6 spinal fracture. Complete motor loss below the level of injury. Admitted 72 hours ago from Rady Children's Hospital after a fall during physical training. Father is Commander James Reeves, United States Marine Corps. No mother listed. No siblings. Just a boy and his father and the silence that comes when everyone stops believing in miracles. Marcus. Her voice is soft. Not weak, soft the way a knife can be soft when it's sharp enough not to need noise. I'm Nurse Cooper. I'm going to be taking care of you this morning. He glances at her for the first time, and his eyes are the color of military-grade concrete, hardened, impersonal, already learning not to hope. But then he stares. Not at her face. At her hands. At the way she moves to his bedside with the precise grace of someone trained in field medicine, someone who has positioned wounded bodies in transport helicopters at 3 in the morning while rounds of enemy fire hammered the aircraft. His eyes widen slightly. He's looking for something. Recognizing something without understanding what. You look like someone, he says finally. Someone I knew. Ashley's hands don't shake. This is the first rule she learned in Helmand Province: the tremor isn't fear, it's restraint. It's the body's preparation for violence held in check. She checks his foreline, a 20-gauge catheter in his left wrist, and sees that the insertion site is already beginning to show signs of infiltration. The 4 is blown. She'll need to replace it. That happens. She turns to gather supplies. People look like other people sometimes. But Marcus isn't done. He lifts his left forearm and shows her the tattoo there, faded now to the color of old denim, inked across his skin in block letters, Nurse Cooper. Below it, a date. The date is from 3 years ago, from a day Ashley has not let herself think about directly, a day that exists in her memory only in the split second before she allows herself to move forward to the next crisis, the next patient, the next life to save. My dad got this for me, Marcus says. His voice is trying to sound tough, but it cracks on the last word. When I was little. He said I should remember the person who carried me through. He said she was the best there was. He said she saved my life before I even knew I needed saving. Ashley stands very still. The fluorescent lights continue their constant hum. Somewhere down the corridor, and 4 pump sounds its alarm, 3 beeps, pause, 3 beeps again. She has had 3 years to prepare for this moment, 3 years knowing that Commander Reeves' son might end up in the system where she now works, and she has told herself that probability is low, that San Diego is large enough to hide in, that certain truths are better left buried. But here is the proof on a child's forearm, inked in permanent ink, a marker that someone remembered what happened in a place that officially never existed. "Your father sounds like a good man," Ashley says. She returns to his bedside with the supplies for a new 4-alcohol wipes, 22-gauge angiocath needle, clear dressing, tourniquet. She wraps the tourniquet around his upper arm, working the vein in his wrist until it rises, a good target, though difficult. The vein rolls when she touches it, one of those impossible targets that requires not just skill but the specific muscle memory of someone who has started fours on wounded soldiers in the back of a Black Hawk helicopter while the aircraft pitched through darkness. He sounds like he doesn't give up on people. She inserts the needle with a single smooth motion. The flash chamber fills with blood. One motion, no hesitation, no fishing around in the tissue. The catheter slides over the needle and seats perfectly. She withdraws the needle, disposes of it in the sharps container, flushes the line with saline. Everything sterile. Everything precise. Everything the way a surgical nurse would do it, not the way a hospital nurse usually does it. Marcus watches her hands move. "You're really good at that," he says finally. "I've had practice," Ashley tells him. She doesn't lie. She has had practice. She has simply had a different kind of practice than her civilian credentials suggest. She secures the 4 with a clear dressing and steps back. "All set. The morning shift will bring your medications around 8. Your father should be here sometime before 9 for rounds." The mention of his father pulls something tight in Marcus's face. "He keeps asking if there's hope," the boy says. "He keeps asking if maybe I could walk again someday." And the doctors all say the same thing. They say no. They say the spinal cord is completely severed and the human body doesn't repair that kind of damage. 7 different doctors have said that. 7 times my dad's face dies a little bit. Ashley finishes documenting the for insertion in his electronic chart and turns toward the door. This is the line that cannot be crossed, the boundary between helping and giving false hope, between the person she was in Helmand Province and the person she must be here. But she pauses in the doorway because Marcus has just spoken a truth that most 12-year-old boys cannot articulate, and because she remembers carrying him through 1,200 meters of enemy fire while his father screamed his name into the radio, and because there are some truths that live deeper than policy. "Marcus!" She turns back. Her voice is exactly the same, soft, controlled, the voice of a woman who has learned to move through the world without drawing attention. "Don't stop hoping. Some people are harder to kill than they look." She leaves before he can respond, moves down the corridor and past the medication dispensary, and does not allow her hands to shake until she is alone in the employee bathroom with the door locked, pressing her palms against the cool metal of the sink. The fluorescent lights buzz overhead. Outside, San Diego's morning continues without her. And in her mind, 3 years collapse into nothing. She is carrying a child through darkness again, his weight against her shoulders, her weapon in her free hand, the radio screaming that the extraction point is compromised, and she is running anyway because some people are harder to kill than they look. By the time Dr. Sterling arrives for morning rounds at 8:15 a.m., Ashley has already completed blood draws on 5 patients, changed 2 full lines, 1 blown, 1 infiltrated, prepared 3 medication charts, and documented everything in the electronic medical record system with the kind of precision that makes other nurses wonder where she learned to move so efficiently through medical workflows. Sterling arrives with his cologne preceding him, expensive and overwhelming, the scent like money spent on fragrance instead of substance. He moves through the unit with the posture of someone accustomed to having rooms rearrange themselves around his presence. He stops at Marcus Reeves' room at 8:22 a.m. Commander James Reeves is already there, a man in his mid-40s with the particular bearing of someone who has commanded other lives, whose shoulders carry the weight of decisions that could not be undone. He wears dress blues, and his eyes are the same color as his son's, but where Marcus's are empty, his are full of the specific desperation of a parent watching their child suffer without remedy. He stands when Sterling enters, offering his hand, and Ashley watches from the chart stand where she has positioned herself to review medications. Commander Reeves. Sterling takes the hand like a man accepting tribute. I wanted to update you on Marcus's evaluation. I've consulted with 6 colleagues, specialists in spinal cord injury, neurosurgery, rehabilitation medicine. The consensus is clear. Your son's spinal cord has sustained complete transection at the T6 level. The damage is permanent. The human body cannot regenerate spinal tissue at this level of injury. There are no current treatments that will restore motor function below the injury site. Commander Reeves' face hardens. Not with anger, but with something worse, the particular hardening that comes when a man accepts information that rewrites his future. Ashley watches him search Sterling's face for the lie he's hoping to find, and finds nothing but professional certainty. Are you saying there's no hope? Reeves asks. His voice is steady, military training overriding the thing trying to break inside his chest. Sterling's posture straightens. He is a man who enjoys delivering verdicts. I'm saying hope is a luxury we can't afford. What Marcus needs is realism. Acceptance. Preparation for a wheelchair-dependent life. I've actually been speaking with some colleagues who run an excellent long-term care facility, Silverstone Care, up in Poa. They have excellent accommodations for spinal cord injuries, adaptive equipment, physical therapy that can help him adjust to his new normal. The words hang in the room like poison. Ashley does not move. Does not blink. Her jaw tightens, 1 millimeter of muscle contraction, visible only to someone trained to read micro-expressions, and then her face returns to the perfect neutrality of someone listening to a superior's medical assessment. But her hands have gone very still against the chart. Still the way a tactical operator's hands go still before action. Commander Reeves looks at his son. Marcus is staring out the window again, his face having already accepted the verdict from the 7 other doctors, from Sterling's confident delivery, from his father's particular despair. The boy's hands rest on the blanket covering his legs, hands that are 12 years old and have never driven a car, never thrown a football, never walked across a stage to accept a diploma. I understand, Reeves says finally. Thank you for being direct, Dr. Sterling. Sterling nods, satisfied, the way a man is satisfied after delivering judgment from on high. He exits the room with the same parade ground posture with which he entered it, his cologne lingering like proof of his presence. And in that moment, as Commander Reeves sits back down beside his son's bed and takes the boy's hand, careful not to disturb the 4-line that Ashley inserted perfectly this morning, she remembers why she carries combat boots in her employee locker, why she moved to San Diego under a new employment name. Why she accepted a position that pays $42,000 a year when she could have taken a discharge medical pension and walked away from this entirely. She remembers Helmand Province. She remembers a 12-year-old boy's weight against her shoulders. She remembers a voice on the radio saying that the extraction point was compromised, that the mission was scrubbed, that they were on their own. And she remembers that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one who has already survived the worst, who has already learned that the statistics everyone quotes are just that, statistics, and that the human body is capable of things that medical textbooks have not yet learned to quantify. Ashley returns the chart to its position and moves past Commander Reeves' room without stopping. But her mind is already calculating something that has nothing to do with shift schedules or medication protocols or the 7 doctors whose combined credentials now stand between her and the one truth that matters: some people are harder to kill than they look. Morning rounds at Sacred Heart moved with the precision of a military formation, except the soldiers wore white coats and carried clipboards instead of rifles. Dr. Sterling led the procession, 6 specialist physicians trailing behind him like subordinates who'd already surrendered their opinions before entering the room. Marcus Reeves lay small against the hospital bed, his 12-year-old frame swallowed by white sheets, legs motionless beneath a thermal blanket. Commander Reeves stood at the window, shoulders squared despite the tremor running through his hands. Sterling positioned himself at the foot of the bed, his voice pitched high enough for maximum clarity, low enough to exclude the child entirely. Permanent paralysis. Complete transection at T10 T11. We're looking at no ambulation potential, no independent mobility, no realistic expectation of neurological recovery. He spoke as though Marcus were furniture. The other doctors nodded in synchronized agreement, a woman from orthopedic surgery, 2 neurologists from the university, a rehabilitation specialist, a physical medicine attending, and a pediatric intensivist. 7 voices. 1 predetermined verdict. The oldest neurologist, Dr. Kaufman, who'd trained at Johns Hopkins 40 years ago, cleared his throat. The imaging is conclusive. Spinal cord injury of this severity doesn't recover. We need to discuss realistic expectations and long-term care options. His tone carried the weight of certainty. It had weight because he believed it. Sterling turned to Commander Reeves. "Sir, I'd like to recommend Silverstone Care in Rancho Santa Fe. My brother-in-law manages their pediatric division. Exceptional facility. They specialize in cases like this: full-time nursing, physical therapy, recreational programming." He paused, letting the words settle. "It's not inexpensive, but they offer comprehensive packages. Most families find it worth the investment." Ashley stood in the corner where nurses stand during rounds, present but not present, visible but not acknowledged. She'd reviewed Marcus's imaging herself. Incomplete transection. The cord was damaged, yes, but not severed. There was swelling pressing on the neural tissue. That swelling could be managed. That pressure could be relieved. That boy could walk. She stepped forward. The initial MRI shows incomplete cord injury. The edema compressing the cord at T11 is still within the window for. Sterling's smile appeared like a cloud passing across the sun. "Nurse Cooper, or should I call you our little optimist?" He turned to the other doctors. "This is what happens when compassion exceeds competence. She means well. I'm sure she does. But let's leave the diagnostics to those with medical degrees, shall we?" The neurologists chuckled. Real chuckles, the kind doctors use when establishing hierarchy. Marcus's eyes fixed on his legs. Ashley's jaw clenched. 1, 2, 3. She breathed through her nose, the same breath she'd taken in Helmand Province when snipers opened fire from a compound 50 meters north. "Keep moving. Don't show the hit." Commander Reeves didn't laugh. His eyes tracked Ashley's face, something shifting there, some recognition of restraint in a woman he didn't quite know. The rounds concluded with prescriptions for palliative care consultations and long-term facility placements. Sterling shook hands with the visiting physicians. 3 of them mentioned referral fees. 1, Dr. Chen, mentioned a malpractice suit Sterling had helped manage years ago. The network held. The network always held. That evening, Ashley found Commander Reeves in the corridor outside Marcus's room. His phone was in his hand, screen illuminated with images of pediatric rehab facilities. His face carried the weight of a man watching his future narrow in real time. She moved past him, then stopped. Stopped in a way that meant she wasn't stopping by accident. "Sir." 1 word. Not more. He looked up. His eyes were the color of worn steel. Ashley took 1 measured breath. Let it out slowly. 1 tear escaped her left eye before she wiped it without breaking eye contact. When she spoke, her voice moved with the gravity of someone who'd made promises under fire. "I've seen miracles happen when everyone else stopped looking." The commander's face cracked, not collapsed, just cracked, like ice breaking under pressure. He opened his mouth. Closed it. Nodded once, sharp as a salute. She continued down the corridor before he could respond. The next morning, Ashley entered the break room at 6:38 a.m. carrying her lunch in a paper bag and her coffee in the same ceramic mug she'd used for 3 months. The room held 8 nurses taking their shift break, 2 eating salads, 1 scrolling through her phone, 2 discussing a patient's family dynamics, 1 reading a novel with a cracked spine. 8 nurses. All present. All employed. By 6:48 a.m., it held only Ashley. The exodus moved with coordinated precision. Bags grabbed mid-bite. Coffee abandoned still steaming on the table. The door swung shut with a pneumatic hiss. One nurse, Jennifer, who'd worked alongside Ashley for 2 months, gathered her things last, her face flushed with something that might have been shame or might have been fear of association. Guilt looked the same either way. Ashley sat at the table for 8, unwrapped her sandwich, and ate alone while fluorescent lights hummed their mechanical prayer above her head. The silence held the weight of a deliberate choice. This wasn't coincidence. This was orchestration. This was a message printed in abandonment. By that afternoon, the message had a physical form. Dr. Sterling had posted a disciplinary write-up on the public unit board where staff, patients, and families all passed throughout their shifts. The paper was white. The lettering was black. The impact was calculated. Disciplinary notice, Nurse A. Cooper. Written warning for unauthorized patient encouragement, undermining physician authority, providing false medical hope to grieving families, and creating patient-family confusion regarding established medical protocols. Repeated violations will result in further disciplinary action up to and including termination. Effective immediately, Nurse Cooper is restricted from providing medical counsel beyond nursing scope of practice. The notice was signed by Dr. Sterling and countersigned by the HR director, Linda Walsh, whose office Sterling had visited this morning carrying coffee and compliments about her daughter's medical school applications. Commander Reeves read it while pushing Marcus's wheelchair past the bulletin board. His son's eyes tracked the words, the way children do, not fully understanding the language but comprehending the message encoded in his father's jaw tightening. "Dad, why don't the other nurses talk to her?" Marcus asked. Sterling appeared beside them as if summoned by the question itself. His presence moved like humidity, gradual, then sudden. "Some people don't know their place, son. They think war stories make them doctors. This hospital has protocols for a reason." Ashley stood 10 feet away, restocking a crash cart with the methodical precision of someone completing a task while drowning. Compression bandages. Airway equipment. For bags in precise rows. She didn't turn. Didn't acknowledge. Didn't let her hand shake even as her face flushed, not from embarrassment, but from the effort of containing something that moved like magma beneath her skin. Restraint felt like pain because it was pain. The trembling wasn't fear. The trembling was restraint. Sterling continued speaking to Commander Reeves, his voice lowered into the register of confidentiality and concern. "I understand why she appeals to you. Nurses often develop attachments to their patients. It makes them feel heroic. But attachment compromises judgment. And in a case like your son's, compromised judgment could mean false hope, delayed grieving, family trauma prolonged for months. We've seen it. It's our job to protect families from it." Commander Reeves nodded, not in agreement, but in the way men nod when they're listening to something they don't entirely trust but can't quite reject. Sterling moved on to his next appointment, his next meeting, his next layer of institutional power. Behind him, Ashley continued restocking the crash cart. Her hands knew the sequence: bandages, airway, fluid, medications, defibrillator pads. Her hands had done this in a clinic in Helmand Province with mortar fire walking the roof above her. Her hands had done this while sand filled the air like ash. Her hands had done this at 2:17 a.m. while carrying a bleeding 12-year-old boy toward extraction, his small body going lighter in her arms as his blood soaked into her uniform. The same 12-year-old boy now lay in a hospital bed 6 floors above her, with his name tattooed on his father's forearm and a paralysis diagnosis that 7 doctors had declared permanent and 1 nurse understood as temporary. What they didn't know was that Dr. Sterling was already on the phone with an investigator. The monitor's alarm cut through the pediatric ICU at 2:13 a.m. like a knife through silk. Marcus Reeves's oxygen saturation was dropping, 94, 92, 88, the red numbers plummeting with a kind of speed that meant something inside his chest had just gone catastrophically wrong. Ashley was 3 feet away, hanging fresh saline, when she heard the change in his breathing. Not laboured. Absent. The left side of his chest sat perfectly still while the right side heaved with the desperation of lungs fighting for air that couldn't reach them. She moved before the alarms finished their first cycle. One hand on his shoulder. Eyes on his neck. The trachea was deviating right, shifted like a river running wrong, pushed by something pressing against his lungs from the inside. Tension pneumothorax. The kind of emergency where every second mattered and most nurses just waited for the doctor. Ashley had performed this exact procedure in a desert medevac helicopter while rounds from an AK-47 punched through the fuselage above her head. The on-call resident, Dr. Patel, appeared at the bedside in mint green scrubs still creased from the package, his face pale as hospital walls. 26 years old, 2 months out of medical school, and currently frozen with the kind of paralysis that comes from seeing something you've only read about in textbooks. I've only seen this in, his voice cracked. His hands hung at his sides like foreign objects. Ashley didn't wait for him to finish the sentence. She was already moving to the crash cart, her movements precise and economical. A 14-gauge needle. Angiocath. No hesitation. No permission asked. The second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line, anatomy burned into muscle memory from 1,000 training scenarios and 3 actual deployments where anatomy meant the difference between someone going home and someone going home in a flag-draped box. She felt the resistance as the needle pierced skin, felt it push through the parietal pleura, felt the exact moment the tension released. The hiss of air escaping was a sound like survival. Like pressure finally finding an exit. Like something broken suddenly working again. Marcus's chest re-inflated. His oxygen saturation climbed, 68, 75, 82, 90, and his heart rate steadied from the panicked 142 down to a rhythm that didn't sound like a bird trapped in a cage. The code team hadn't even made it down the corridor yet. They arrived 30 seconds later to find a stabilized patient and a nurse with perfectly steady hands documenting the procedure with military precision, time, location, needle gauge, outcome. No drama. No trembling. No trace of the woman who'd carried a dying 12-year-old Marine son through 3 miles of firefight 8 years ago in a province that didn't exist on civilian maps. Dr. Patel stared at her hands as she secured the angiocath with tape. "Where did you learn to do that?" "Books," Ashley said. Not a lie. Just incomplete. The kind of answer that told you exactly nothing while answering everything for anyone who knew how to listen. She didn't look up from her charting, didn't meet his eyes, didn't do any of the things that might draw attention to what had just happened. Commander James Reeves arrived at 4:15 a.m. in civilian clothes, polo shirt and jeans, no uniform, having been pulled from his base quarters by a phone call that said his son had crashed and a nurse had saved him. He moved through the ICU doors with the controlled urgency of a man trained to manage crisis, and when he reached Marcus's bedside, he stood there for a long moment just watching his boy's chest rise and fall with steady, normal breathing. The trachea had drifted back to center. The monitors hummed their gentle rhythm. Everything that had been catastrophically wrong was now working. He turned to find Ashley charting at the nurse's station, already moving on to the next 12 things that needed doing. There was no fanfare in her. No waiting for gratitude. No story to tell. Just a nurse finishing her documentation with the kind of focus that suggested nothing unusual had happened at all. "You saved him." Commander Reeves's voice was low, and it shook in the way that voices only shake when they're saying thank you for a life instead of a funeral. Ashley nodded once. A single vertical gesture. "He's stable. Respiratory is good. We'll monitor for pneumomediastinum, but the decompression should hold." She turned a page in the chart. "His vitals are normal. Pain is controlled." What she didn't say was that she'd already been through this scenario 8 times in combat. What she didn't say was that muscle memory had taken over completely, that her hands had moved with the automatic precision of apex predators striking, that the fear on Dr. Patel's face had registered in her the same way distant artillery registered, as information, not as threat. What she didn't say was anything that would make her memorable, quotable, or notable in any way that mattered. Commander Reeves reached out like he wanted to touch her shoulder, then seemed to understand that wasn't the right language here. Instead he just nodded and returned to his son's bedside, his eyes on Marcus's face, his hand resting on the railing of the bed like he was grounding himself to something solid. Ashley finished her documentation at 4:52 a.m., 14 minutes before the end of her shift. She restocked the crash cart. She checked on her other 3 patients. She handed off to the day shift nurses with a kind of clinical precision that suggested she was just another nurse finishing just another night. The only thing that didn't fit was the way her hands were perfectly steady. The way her voice hadn't wavered once. The way she moved through the unit like someone who'd done this exact thing, saving lives in impossible circumstances, before. Dr. Sterling arrived at 6:15 a.m. in his Mercedes sedan, the parking lot still dark, his coffee still steaming in a leather-wrapped cup from the private club he belonged to. He'd been called by someone on the night shift, a concerned colleague, they'd said, about a procedure that had been performed without proper physician supervision. The kind of procedural irregularity that could expose Sacred Heart to liability. The kind of thing that needed to be documented immediately. By 8:33 a.m., Sterling was in the Chief of Staff's office with the investigation file Webb had compiled on Ashley's fabricated background, her dead-end references, the small inconsistencies that suggested someone living a carefully constructed lie. "We have a cowboy nurse with a fake background performing invasive procedures without physician oversight," Sterling said, spreading the file across the desk like evidence at a crime scene. "She performed an emergency needle decompression at 2:51 this morning with no attending present. Dr. Patel was there but he's still on probation from his pediatric rotation. If something had gone wrong, if she'd nicked the lung or the heart, we'd be looking at a wrongful death suit that would cost this institution millions." The Chief of Staff, a man named Holloway who'd worked with Sterling for 15 years and owed him favors for different referral kickback arrangements, studied the file. "Did the procedure work?" "That's not the point," Sterling said. "The point is protocol. The point is that we have an employee with questionable credentials performing trauma procedures. What if she kills the next patient?" He closed the file with the sound of something final. "I'm recommending immediate termination. For cause. Unauthorized medical practice." By 2:27 p.m., Ashley was being escorted out of the pediatric ICU by security guard Ramon Diaz, a man she'd shared dozens of shifts with, a man who looked at his shoes instead of her face because he knew what this cardboard box meant and it was breaking something in him. Her stethoscope. Her badge. Her trauma shears. And sitting on top of everything, in a way that made sure everyone in the corridor could see them, the pair of worn combat boots from Helmand Province, the leather cracked from heat and sand, the laces frayed from 3 tours and counting, the soles worn thin from 15 miles a day running through terrain that wanted to kill you. "I'm sorry," Ramon said, his voice barely above a whisper. Ashley took the box without emotion. "It's not your fault." She walked out through the main lobby in her street clothes, carrying a cardboard box that held a 12-year history of a life she'd built from ashes, and she didn't look back. The door slid open automatically. The San Diego air hit her face, carrying the salt smell of the Pacific and the diesel exhaust from the parking lot, and she stood there for exactly 3 seconds before moving toward her car. That was when Commander Reeves saw her from the 3rd-floor window of the pediatric ICU, his hand still resting on the phone that was sitting on the table beside him. He watched her walk across the parking lot with the cardboard box, watched her set it on the front passenger seat, watched her sit in the driver's seat with her hands on the steering wheel and her head still perfectly level. He'd seen a lot of things in his 23 years as a Marine. He'd seen soldiers break. He'd seen officers collapse under pressure. He'd seen fear and pain and desperation written across 1,000 faces. But he'd never seen someone carry loss like this, like it was just information, like it was just another thing to process and move past. He reached for his phone. Then he stopped. Whatever he wanted to say, whatever he needed to say, there was no way to say it from behind a phone line. There was no protocol for this. No rank that covered what he was feeling, and no words that would cover what that woman had just done or what had just been done to her. The morning after the needle decompression, Dr. Sterling's phone made 7 calls before his coffee cooled. Board member Patricia Hughes picked up on the second ring. "Patricia, we have a credibility crisis," Sterling said, his voice smooth as polished marble. "That nurse performed an unsupervised procedure. We need to move before she becomes a liability." 3 other board members received identical messages within the hour, board members who'd referred their wealthier patients to Sterling's brother-in-law's facility and benefited handsomely from the kickback arrangements that padded their private practices. Each call was calibrated. Each favor was already owed. By noon, investigator Gerald Webb was on the case. Sterling handed him the file personally. Check her credentials. Everything about her background. I suspect fraud. Webb, a man whose skepticism had been honed by 23 years of hospital investigations, began dialing. He called the military medical college listed on Ashley's resume. Dead end, no record of enrollment. He called the address listed as her previous employment in a rural Virginia clinic. The clinic had closed 9 years ago. No forwarding information. He called her references. One had a disconnected number. Another was a fake. The address belonged to an abandoned building in Richmond. Each dead end made Ashley's background appear less legitimate and more suspicious, exactly as Sterling had calculated. That afternoon, Gerald Webb sat across from Ashley in the HR office with a file folder and a measured expression. "Your credentials don't check out," he said flatly. "Previous employment verifies nowhere. References are false. Where exactly did you train?" Ashley's jaw clenched, the only visible reaction she permitted herself. "I served," she said quietly. "My records are complicated." Webb leaned back. "That's not good enough. Sacred Heart cannot employ someone without verifiable credentials. This conversation is over." The words hung like a guillotine blade already fallen. Security arrived at 2:16 p.m. with a cardboard box. Ashley entered her locker methodically, the few personal items she'd accumulated during her time in the ICU, the small photograph of Marcus that she'd kept turned face down in her drawer. At the bottom of the box went the pair of worn combat boots from Helmand Province, the leather creased and faded from desert heat and human suffering. The boots were the only physical tether to who she actually was, and as security wheeled her toward the exit, they sat exposed on top of everything else, visible to everyone who watched her walk out. Commander Reeves stood in the observation window above the pediatric unit, watching her disappear through the sliding glass doors. His hands gripped the railing hard enough to blanch his knuckles. 48 hours later, Ashley sat in the San Diego VA hospital waiting room at 2:53 p.m., 7 minutes early for her intake appointment. The room smelled like industrial coffee and older things, anxiety, medication, the particular exhaustion that came from surviving things you weren't supposed to survive. Men in veteran baseball caps occupied the folding chairs around her. One had a prosthetic leg that caught the fluorescent light. Another stared at nothing with eyes that had seen too much. A woman with a Marine Corps tattoo on her forearm read a magazine she wasn't actually processing. Ashley recognized the posture in all of them because it was her own posture, the spine held rigid, the breathing controlled, the 1,000-yard stare that came from learning how to be still while everything inside screamed. A Marine with a Vietnam-era cap glanced at her and held it longer than a second. "You serve?" he asked, his voice a gravel rasp. Ashley nodded without elaborating. That was enough. He nodded back and returned to his magazine. No pity, no questions, no need for explanation. Just recognition. The intake coordinator called her name at exactly 3:19 p.m. "Cooper, Ashley." The clinic walls were painted a shade of green that was meant to be calming but only intensified the clinical nature of what was happening. A young therapist named Dr. Rayner reviewed the intake form, her eye scanning the checkboxes Ashley had marked. Combat exposure, checked. Traumatic events, checked. Recurring nightmares, checked. Sleep disturbance, checked. Hypervigilance, checked. Inability to trust authority, checked. Loss of purpose, checked. Every box that mapped the geography of survival. How long have you been experiencing these symptoms? Dr. Rayner asked, her pen poised above her notes. 15 years, Ashley said. It got worse this week. Dr. Rayner didn't ask what happened this week. That conversation would come later, in sessions that Ashley wasn't sure she'd keep. The intake took 42 minutes. By 3:42 p.m., she was back in the waiting room, walking past the same Marine in the Vietnam cap, past the woman with the tattoo, past all of them, her tribe and her mirror image. That evening in her studio apartment in Ocean Beach, Ashley stood in front of her closet staring at the shadow box she hadn't opened in 3 years. The Navy Cross sat centered in the display, flanked by 2 purple hearts and a silver star, each ribbon precisely positioned, each medal representing something she'd been ordered to forget. She'd kept the box because burning it felt like betrayal and displaying it felt like death. So it stayed hidden, a version of herself she'd been instructed to erase. The lock clicked at 6:15 p.m. Her 17-year-old son Daniel entered with his ROTC uniform still on, the grey and black of his military academy jacket bearing the insignia of a sophomore who understood more than most. He saw her standing at the closet door and something shifted in his expression. "Mom, why did you really lose your job?" Daniel asked, his voice carrying the precision of someone who already knew the outline of the truth and needed only the details. Ashley turned from the closet. "I saved a boy's life. They fired me for it." The words were incomplete, but they were honest. Daniel stepped forward and lifted the shadow box from the shelf. His fingers traced the medal cases. "Then they need to see who you really are," he said. "I was ordered to disappear," Ashley replied, and the words sounded like surrender. "Senior Chief Petty Officer Ashley Cooper doesn't exist, Daniel. Not officially. After Helmand Province, they classified the operation, erased my records, and told me never to surface. The alternative was a dishonorable discharge." Daniel's face set with recognition. "The kid," he said. "Marcus Reeves. He's the same 12-year-old from the photograph you keep in your boots. The one you never explained." Ashley's silence was confirmation. Daniel made a decision that she saw crystallize across his face like ice forming on glass. He moved to the kitchen counter where his mother's hospital directory still lay, picked up his phone, and found Commander Reeves in the directory. "Daniel, don't," Ashley said, but he was already dialing. The phone rang 3 times before Commander Reeves answered. "Sir, this is Daniel Cooper. My mother's name is Ashley Cooper and she was fired from Sacred Heart for saving your son's life. There's a board meeting tomorrow at 10 a.m. to finalize her termination." Daniel's voice was steady. "You need to be there. And you need to see something." Ashley watched her son's jaw set with the same determination she'd worn into 3 tours. The radio static of authority still crackled in his blood, inherited and waiting. That night, neither of them slept. The doors burst open with the force of someone who'd been carrying something heavy, not just the shadow box, but the weight of understanding. Daniel Cooper stood in the conference room threshold, 17 years old and trembling not with fear but with purpose, holding his mother's Navy Cross and Purple Heart like they were made of starlight. The cardboard seemed impossibly fragile for what it contained. He didn't hesitate, didn't perform. He simply walked to the conference table and placed the medals down with the reverence of someone who'd grown up knowing exactly what they meant. "Mom, they need to see these." 5 words. That's all it took to crack open a room full of people who'd been trained to see only what was convenient. Commander Reeves stepped forward first, his movements carrying the weight of rank and recognition simultaneously. His hand reached for the file beside the medals, fingers trembling, the only tremor in the room that wasn't pretense. He read aloud, his voice breaking on every syllable like he was reading scripture, "Senior Chief Petty Officer Ashley Cooper." The words hung in the air like they'd physically changed the atmospheric pressure. Board members exchanged glances. Patricia Hughes leaned forward, her skepticism collapsing in real time. Dr. Sterling's jaw tightened, a muscle working beneath his skin like something trying to escape. A man in dress blues appeared in the doorway, the kind of presence that made the entire room recalibrate. Commander Marcus Breaker Holloway, SEAL Team 3, moved with the fluid precision of someone who'd survived things that should have killed him. He walked directly to the photograph clipped to the file and pointed with one calloused finger at a young woman in desert combat gear, cradling a wounded boy while rounds snapped overhead. "That's Senior Chief Cooper." His voice sounded like gravel over concrete. "Helmand Province. February 2021. She carried my radioman son through a firefight that should have ended both of them. Taliban position at 200 meters. She moved that kid a mile and a half under suppressing fire and never once set him down. He looked at Dr. Sterling directly. You look at her and see a scared nurse. I look at her and see someone who's held more lives together than you've built insurance companies. The room exhaled collectively. An FBI liaison stood next, Agent Torres, opening a laptop that projected spreadsheet data across the wall. But first he spoke directly to Ashley. Senior Chief Cooper, the Helmand Province operation that was classified has been declassified as of this morning, specifically to establish your service record and credibility in this matter. Your background clearance is highest level. Your medical credentials under your civilian identity have been verified against your military records. He turned to the board. Everything she told you about herself is true. Everything Dr. Sterling implied about her is false. The file made its way around the table now, photocopies of deployment orders, 3 separate tours, 17 documented medical saves in field conditions. One board member's hand shook as she read. Another removed their glasses and pressed their eyes shut. The numbers accumulated like evidence of a life lived at a completely different altitude than anyone in this room had previously understood. Dr. Sterling's face drained of color. Not gradually. All at once, like someone had pulled a plug. His hands gripped the armrest of his chair, knuckles white, but his voice had gone absent, the kind of silence that's louder than speech. The same security guard who'd handed Ashley her cardboard box of belongings 2 days prior, Ramon Diaz, whose name tag she'd read while her hands were too full to defend herself, now walked to the conference table carrying an identical box. He set it down in front of Dr. Sterling with the precision of a man performing a ritual. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who'd watched Ashley pack her combat boots and understood exactly what that meant. I believe you know the way out, Doctor. The metaphor landed like a physical object. Board Chairman Robert Chen didn't waste words. Dr. Sterling, your medical license is under review by the State Medical Board. Your hospital privileges are revoked effective immediately. Our legal team is cooperating fully with federal authorities regarding the insurance fraud investigation. He paused. You should consult an attorney. What happened next came with the sound of a chair scraping backward, the kind of sound that announces defeat. Sterling stood, his box clutched against his chest, and walked toward the door. He passed Ashley without speaking, without meeting her eyes. She stood against the wall with shoulders squared and her breathing perfectly controlled. When he got within arm's length, she simply exhaled once, the only reaction she permitted herself, and looked through him as though he'd already ceased to exist. The mask didn't crack. The mask had been her armor all along. Daniel crossed the room in 3 strides and wrapped his arm around his mother's shoulders. Commander Reeves approached with his hand extended, then abandoned the formality and pulled her into an embrace that felt like recognition. Thank you, he said into her shoulder. Thank you for bringing him home. I did my job, Commander. No. He pulled back, holding her shoulders. No. You did what 7 doctors said was impossible. You did what all of us stopped believing in. His eyes glistened with the kind of tears that come from understanding you've been wrong about someone for years. 6 months compressed into a single cut. Ashley stood in the pediatric ICU corridor wearing her name badge with a small navy anchor pin beneath it, her compromise with visibility. Through the window of the physical therapy room, she watched Marcus Reeves gripping parallel bars with white knuckles, his legs shaking as he took supported steps. 6 inches. 8 inches. 1 full foot forward. The rubber soles of his shoes squeaked against the polished floor with each increment of progress, a sound like small victories accumulating. Commander Reeves stood behind his son, tears streaming freely now, not bothering to hide them. That's it, Marcus. That's it. 1 more step. Ashley monitored from the doorway with her clipboard, tracking his progress with the same precision she brought to everything, every vital sign, every medication, every small rebellion against what the world had declared permanent. The physical therapist glanced back and mouthed thank you toward her. Ashley nodded once. Through the opposite window, Across the street in the parking lot of a strip mall, a folding table sat with a cardboard sandwich board propped beside it, supplemental insurance policies. Dr. Sterling sat behind the table in a wrinkled dress shirt, watching people pass. Most walked past without stopping. A few lingered, considered, moved on. He checked his phone repeatedly. Nobody called. She didn't smile watching him. Didn't feel triumph or justice or closure. Just observed that consequences eventually find everyone, and sometimes they arrive in folding tables under fluorescent parking lot lights. After the session, Commander Reeves pushed Marcus's wheelchair, which the boy now only needed for long distances, toward the elevator. He paused beside Ashley, understanding now everything the tattoo had meant, understanding that the woman who'd carried his son through Helmand Province had also refused to let him disappear into a profitable long-term care facility. "You saved him twice," he said quietly. "Once in war. Once in peace." Ashley met his eyes with her characteristic stillness. "I just did my job, Commander." "Both times?" He shook his head. "No. You did what 7 doctors said was impossible." Daniel stood in the doorway during his college break, watching the exchange. Later that shift, a younger nurse named Sarah approached Ashley's station with questions burning behind her eyes. "Is it true you were some kind of special forces medic?" Ashley organized her charts methodically. "I was a nurse. I am a nurse." Daniel stepped forward from the doorway. "Mom, you can tell her." Ashley's hand moved to the anchor pin on her badge, that small act of defiance and honesty combined. She looked at Sarah directly, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone who'd finally stopped hiding. "You do not need a badge or a gun to be a warrior. You just need to show up when everyone else walks away." Sarah stared, wanting more details, wanting the full story, but Ashley was already moving to her next patient, quiet, competent, and finally visible. The combat boots that had been packed in that cardboard box were still in her locker. She didn't need to wear them anymore. She was already home. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who didn't know your true value, share your story in the comments below. And if you know someone like Ashley Cooper, someone quiet, capable, and constantly proving the doubters wrong, tag them and let them know they're seen. Subscribe for more stories of the unsung heroes walking among us, and hit that notification bell so you never miss the moment when the truth finally catches up to the lies.